This is Mark and Charity's Coffee Podcast.
Mark and Charity Coffee Podcast, Thursday, June 8th today. Special big time podcast. Which I only say every other podcast.
Oh, I know, but we've been looking for I don't want to speak for you. I have been looking forward to this one for a while. I think you have too, because we both really enjoy Chief Mike Callaghan, and just fascinating.
Belleville Police Chief Mike Callaghan. Back when we were doing our pickleballing, back in January.
Did he play pickleball?
He was on Patricia Guernsey's team Belleville, which went down in a resounding defeat to Ken Schmidt and Team Quinte West, of which the trophy continues to make its way around the Quinte region.
Do you know who has it this month?
I don't know who has it for June. I should have found that out. Thank you. I will look I'll look into that.
All right.
Try to have that information for you for tomorrow. Remind me to email Ken. But anyway, he and I, we got talking about, some stuff and, writing and policing and stuff where I thought we should get together.
Yes, he was one of your consultants.
And he said, you know what? We should do a podcast on it sometime. And
because you were sharing with me some of the stuff he was telling you. And I said, that would be amazing to sit down and talk to him.
But part of me thought he would, not that he was kidding, but it's like, how do you, of all people, Mike, sort of carve out enough time that you'd want to sit down for an hour with us? And as soon as we started suggesting times, I said, yeah, let's just do that. So not that he isn't busy. He valued it. He wanted to get it out there because he believes that strong communications within the community is an important part of what the Belleville Police Service is all about.
Well, and as you will hear in the podcast, too, when we were talking to him, it was a wonderful point he made, because he had a mentor himself who shared with him that if you don't share your experiences, if you don't talk about what you've done and offer that advice and that insight and wisdom, really,
encouragement,
then what's it been for? Mm-hmm. Why have you done it at all if you're not going to then pass it on and share it? And that was part of it too. And I think that is just so wonderful and not surprising. It makes sense considering in the position he's in now as chief. You want to share that with other people and help improve and move forward with others.
So sit back, unless of course you're driving, then just continue to pay attention, but enjoy the next half hour or so with a guy who really knows what's going on. Belleville Police Chief Mike Callaghan.
It's my pleasure. Actually, I'm really looking forward to the opportunity of having a chat with you for your podcast.
Finally, we were talking about this even before we came to the station to go for our tour. We've been kind of talking about this and wanting to pick your brain a little bit and talk about your experiences.
Well, you're more than welcome to pick away, but there's not a lot there, so help yourself.
Well, way back at the beginning of the podcast, I said I'd love to do a podcast, and Charity said only if we can get Police Chief Mike Callaghan in. So it's taken a while. But the fascinating part, first of all, congratulations on the one officer who just won the provincial award.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
So how good does that feel to know that this is a department that you're the face of?
Well, we're so fortunate to have some amazing individuals, and I've known about this for quite a while, but had to keep it under wraps because it was a provincial award, and there could not be a more deserving officer. And every single day we have so many officers that help members of the public. They dig into their own pockets to pay for things. They just go out of the way to help the general public. And that's something that makes the Belleville Police Service so very, very unique.
Do you encourage that? Sorry, do you encourage it?
Oh, we certainly do.
Yeah,
We really do, because when you look at police services across Ontario and you look at the work that they do, everybody does the same work. But what makes you different and what gets the public support is the officers doing those extra little things that aren't spoke about but mean so much to the public. And at the end of the day, I tell every single officer, you want to remember every single interaction that you're having with a member of the public, you're negotiating your next contract. And I think that is a very strong, profound statement that really makes the officers think about what it is that they're doing. And when you look at the number of complaints for the number of interactions that we have with the members of the public, I think last year it was 0.02% of the time. So that's extraordinary.
Because you would think it's half.
Well,
because you only hear, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, but policing has changed so much it's not just about making sure everybody obeys the law now. You have so many other hats and so many other roles you play with people in the community.
There really is. And there's been so many philosophical changes in policing since I joined in 1985. And please don't say either one of you weren't born at that time, because that's going to kill me. But It really has. And one of the most important things, I think, in the progression of policing is the fact that we have become more victim-centered. So back in the mid-'80s, we were very focused on getting the perpetrator, getting that person arrested and getting them incarcerated.
Right.
And while that's still very important, we really didn't focus on the victim and the victimization. And that's a quantum leap that we've made, and I think it's really important for us to continue down that path. We still have a lot of work to do. But just in the sense of policing in the 80s and early 90s, it was very clearly cut what your responsibilities were, what you did and what you didn't do. And now we are everything from, and I think the best way to describe it is, we're the first call and the last call and everything in between.
Yeah.
And the officers have to be social workers, marriage counselors, psychological counselors, know the law, and everything in between. And I think it's important that we maintain that, because I also believe that right now there's so much instability in society as a whole that the interactions that the police have with the public, it's critical for them to know that we're out there to support them in so many different capabilities and so many different functions. Because in internal memos, I say to our folks, you need to realize that what you do is the reason why people can sleep at night. And it's that inner peace of knowing that there's somebody out there that's looking out for you. And if we didn't have that, we would be a pretty lawless society, and we wouldn't enjoy the wonderful things we do in the Quinte region.
You know, you talk about the philosophy. I know when I moved here 25 years ago, I was speaking with then the police chief, and I made the comment where I said Belleville Police Force, and I was corrected. We're not a police force, we're a police service. So even in the name, that philosophy is front and center.
Absolutely right. And I think there's only one or two police services in Ontario now that still refer to themselves as a police force. And it's not the right perspective, because we are a service. We are a service and a servant of the public.
Mike Callaghan, Belleville Police Chief of Belleville Police Services, on the Mark and Charity Coffee Podcast today.
Let's back it up a bit, Chief, and get into your background within the police services. Because both Mark and I have had this conversation. We picture it in our head. You kind of move up through the ranks to get to chief, but your path is very unique in the sense that you did a lot in forensics before becoming chief.
I did. I was very fortunate. I spent almost 10 years in forensics and had a great opportunity to be exposed to so many different things and so many cutting edge pieces of technology that were coming available at the time. And we were very fortunate, because the staff sergeant that was in charge of our unit at the time, God bless him, he's passed away, but Herbie Durand, he always had a saying, and he said, you have the tools of science. It's now up to your imagination to apply those pieces of science to find who is responsible for that crime. And that's something that really resonated with me, and it just seemed to click, and I went, I'm in. And so it was fantastic. I mean, I had some unbelievable opportunities, some unbelievable cases. I was even able to work with a doctor from Health Canada and a firefighter. And at the time, and I guess this would have been around 97, 98, we were having a lot of white powder concerns. If you remember, there was a big concern at the time about anthrax and the powder in magazines. And so we actually did an experiment in our forensic labs in Ottawa that ended up getting published in the American medical journals, and it was used as a foundation for the starting of the anthrax dispersion in offices and buildings, and we were utilizing the air handling units and what happens when they're on, what happens when they're off. So it was really fascinating, because it's a project that I wanted to take on. And again, my supervisor said, go for it. So we jumped on and did a lot of it on our own time, but it was fascinating. Something I really enjoyed.
The field of forensics, as we know, based on watching television, we think is new. But I know of a story of like 200 years ago, if I could bore you for 30 seconds, that the first time it was ever used was a police officer in the 1700s, that a body was found that was beaten with a shovel. So he went around and he got all the farmers together and said, bring me your shovels. And they all stood side by side with their shovel up, in the hot sun waiting for the flies. Because they thought if I just clean my shovel, they'll never know.
Exactly.
But this officer knew enough about science. As soon as all the flies stand to land on one particular clean shovel, they had the culprit. So forensics, as we know it, isn't new. But boy, has technology and computerization ever changed the way you do it.
Well, it really has. And something just to follow up on what you said, Mark, was one of the founding fathers of forensic is the Locard's transfer theory. And basically what that theory is whenever two surfaces come into contact, there's a partial transfer of material from one to the other, whether it's detectable by the human eye or not. So just to give you your example about the shovel, there's different chemicals that we can use today to make that the whole blood proteins fluoresce. But in that era, it was the flies, and the flies knew that there were the blood proteins on there, and they would be definitely attracted to it. So when you think about that, when there's the partial transfer of material from one to another, even if you think about if you take and you placed your hand on the desk, you're going to pick away some dust that's on the desk microscopically that you're not even going to see, and then within the ridges of your fingerprints, you have what they call sebaceous glands, and they secrete a sebaceous fluid that leaves your fingerprint on the table. So even just me putting my hand there, if I were to take and use something like either a fingerprint powder or a chemical called, if it was on paper, DFO or an anhydrine, these are different chemicals that we can use that have been introduced. I think they were around the early 30s that they started to use chemical analysis for fingerprints.
Right.
But it's just fascinating what you can do. And you're really limited by your imagination and the science.
Well, and that's the point. At some point, some officer said, let me just try this. Get your shovel, boys. Like somebody had to think of that as an investigative technique.
Absolutely.
So what drew you to the forensics? Because it isn't for everybody, right?
No, it certainly isn't. There's a funny story. I got asked this about 6 months ago. And I actually thought about it, and ironically enough, when I was 7 years old, for my birthday, it was about $11 or $12 from aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters, and I went out and bought a microscope. And I was fascinated by the slides that came with this little microscope. And if you remember, Consumers Distributing.
Oh, yeah.
I went to Consumers Distributing, and I had to order it because it wasn't available in Kingston, was where Consumers Distributing was. And I ordered it. It came in, and all the different slides, I was looking at them, and I was going, this is just fascinating. And then during high school, I was very interested in sciences and biology. And I can remember my dad, God bless him, saying to me, you know what, son, you really need to take physics. And I thought to myself, when am I ever going to use physics? Like, this is just stupid. Wow, boy, was I wrong. Because the segue for getting into forensics for me was accident reconstruction. And accident reconstruction is actually all about math. And it's all physics and in linear momentum and crush calculations and yaw marks. And so it was great to be able to have that background to be able to pursue those different areas. And that's why I always say to kids when I have the opportunity, I should say young people, when I go to high schools and grade schools, don't limit yourself by what you're interested in. Get outside your comfort zone and just explore those different types of maths and sciences and arts, because it just exposes you to so many possibilities when you get older.
So when we're having these arguments with our children, then when they're in school, just step back for a moment. Yeah, you really never know where it's going to come into play and how it's going to play itself out and be used, because that's amazing.
Yeah, it was interesting because I had many of these same conversations with both my sons, and ironically enough, they're both in policing now, which I did not see coming, I have to admit. But
either of them interested in forensics?
Well, no. They the one is in a uniform gang unit, and the other one is in a something that I did quite a bit of, and that was major event planning. So he did the last marathon in Ottawa, has done presidential visits, and now he's planning Canada Day.
Wow.
So
in the capital.
That's
an event.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a case where you've just been stumped? You've looked at everything and your imagination just couldn't pull it out?
There was one case, and I ended up just stumbling on this success by accident. It truly was. So I'll give an overview. We have John Doe, who has been murdered, and he was murdered over a drug debt. And the criminal investigators and the forensic unit, which I was part of, there was 2 of us doing the homicide investigation. We went over every inch of that house, and it was one of the longer investigations at the crime scene because we just weren't getting any tangible evidence. So we worked on it. We checked evidence. We went through it. We had actually another forensic team actually come in and look at our evidence to see if we were actually missing anything. And so one day I got a request from a major crime investigator. He said, "We just got a tip that this gentleman may be involved as a potential suspect. And we really don't have a lot, but we've got a pair of boots that he discarded." So I said, okay. So we went over those boots top to bottom. We used every forensic application that you could possibly think of, and we've got nothing.
Couldn't tie him to the crime scene?
No, nothing. So I was sitting there and I was reviewing all my notes. I was reviewing all the pieces of evidence, and I just had a really, really strong gut feeling that this person was responsible. So I was sitting in the back lab and I'm looking at all the different pieces of equipment we have in the back lab, and I went, okay, I'm going to try what they refer to as an alternate light source. So at that time, we didn't have laser light sources, but we had what they called an alternate light source. So it went from basically, the wavelength was like 10 nanometers to 900.
Like black light? Like what we would think of? No.
With different glasses on, it makes different wavelengths will make different things turn a different color, or depending on what type of material is on it, it may make it fluoresce.
Okay.
So do you remember Greb Kodiak boots?
Yeah.
Okay. That's exactly what this was.
Okay.
So, and they were quite worn, so there wasn't really a distinctive tread pattern on them either. So I got shining the light source and I was going through all the different wavelengths, and all of a sudden on the third eyelet from the top, I see a slight discoloration around the outside of the brass eyelet. And remember, they all had brass eyelets on them. So I went, there's got to be something there. So I took and got a pair of needle nose pliers, and I actually had to take them out to the grinder and grind them down so that they were sharp. And I started to peel back the eyelet. And as I started to peel it back, I noticed a dark material that was consistent with blood. So I went and I got a swab and put it in a sterile solution, swabbed that dry blood, got a second swab, had enough for 2, sent it off to the forensic labs, the RCMP labs in Ottawa, and it came back being the major component was the suspect and the minor component was the deceased.
The victim. Wow.
So it was game, set, match.
Yeah.
So,
and just that was enough to
convict.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Convict.
Wow.
So that was one that we were truly stumped, and it was one that just really, really solved that crime at the end of the day. And once we had the forensic evidence, he admitted to committing the homicide.
And the communication, though, among forces, when somebody says, hey, I got a pair of boots, what do you need? You know, like somebody's got to make the call.
100%.
Yeah.
So it just, and again, it just is a great example of not giving up and utilizing every single piece of forensic equipment and tools that you have at your disposal.
Yeah.
It's so small, though. I'm just boggled by that. That little swab, that's all it was. And if you hadn't gone back, you would never have known it was there.
Because on TV, there's buckets of them, and they're everywhere. You know.
And they can do it in 40 minutes.
Exactly.
That's right.
And it happens like that.
Police Chief Mike Callaghan joining Mark and Charity on the podcast. Can you watch television? Knowing what you know about forensics, because
Does it drive
everything's
you
forensic
crazy?
on it now. Like all of the
Yeah.
CSIs, of course, are based on forensics.
They are, and some of them are quite well done. Some of them aren't. I used to be quite impressed, actually, with Dexter. So
Right. I love
Okay.
that show.
whoever their forensic support was or liaison, they knew their stuff. They did very,
Keep
very
an
well.
eye on that individual.
Yeah.
They are too good at that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you said about leaving fingerprints everywhere, like a piece of you, no matter where you come in contact. Is blood generally the go-to, or what do you look for? Because you got to go into a scene not knowing what to look for. So, what jumps out at you at a scene?
So when you go into a scene, you're really trying to process what is available to you, and what I used to do was when I went into a scene, I would identify, because one of the big things, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Mark, from your writing, is that the path of contamination. So you want to find out where the emergency service folks have been in front of you, and then you stay as much as you can to that path of contamination. What I would end up doing was I would end up finding a chair in the scene. I'd have my bunny suit on, and I would actually sit in the middle of the room where the homicide or attempt murder was committed, and I would sit there and process it mentally for about 45 minutes to an hour.
That's amazing.
Just sit there and take everything in.
Take everything in. And I was trying to develop a sequence of events of what has transpired, what may have transpired, and looking beyond what you would normally look at. So what I would start to look at is the blood and the physical evidence is there is apparent. Everybody's going to see that. It doesn't matter who you are. What I would look at was I would try to identify small things that appeared to be out of place. And you try to almost develop a psychological profile of the victim as to what their lifestyle was like. Were they a tidy person? Were they quite messy? Did they fold their clothes? Did they throw their clothes? And you would just have a look around and try to get a sense of understanding of what was this person thinking and what happened at what time and how did it happen. Mm-hmm. And then as you start to put those pieces together, you start to build an objective understanding of what may have happened. And I didn't want to actually speak to the homicide investigators, and I would ask them, don't tell me anything that you've got from witnesses. I don't want to know that.
Right.
I don't
Colors the way you look at the scene.
100%.
Yeah.
And because, believe it or not, eyewitness testimony is likely one of the worst things you can utilize.
Yeah.
Because you may see something, Mark may see something. If you give separate statements, you may have seen something completely
Totally different.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I would not want to be jaded by anything that the investigators may have gleaned out of their interviews. So I would, as much as possible, try to remain completely objective so that when I started to process things, that I had a clear, objective perspective, and I was relying on the physical evidence as well as the future unseen evidence. And sometimes you'll get suspects trying to clear or trying to hide their evidence, trying to, remove blood. And removing blood is so hard.
Yeah.
Because there's a chemical called leucomalachite green that you can use to bring blood out, and it's just amazing that how well it fluoresces. And so you want to be objective, you want to be unbiased, you want to make sure that you're really looking at things that wouldn't normally jump out at you. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because I've often heard people say, oh, I can tell that you're an ident guy. And it's just because the way we look at things and the way that we process things. So we try to be extremely methodical, and very methodical sometimes takes a lot of time. So unlike the TV shows, we don't solve it in 40 minutes.
48 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, and that's
looking
just
good in a suit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
With the boots, going back to that first story, how long did it take to find that from start to when that crime occurred? What was the timeline like?
Oh, I bet you we were close to 6.5, 7 months.
Really?
Wow. Never gave up.
And we had gone stale. And I knew there had to be something there. It was just a gut feeling. I can tell you another one. We were working on a scene where a young boy had been abducted and sexually assaulted. And as we were going through the residence of the suspect, I spent 24 days in that residence. And we had ripped out walls. We had, it was the first time in the history of the Ottawa Police Service that we had used GPR, or ground penetrating radar. So we actually were scanning the walls because there was some concrete work. So we were able to see through the walls. We scanned the backyard. And we actually had a gentleman from the RCMP develop a psychological profile for us. And one of the things that this psychological profiler had indicated to us, he said, you were going to find these trophies at the residence because this individual will never throw out those trophies. They mean too much to him.
Okay.
So we said, okay. So we ripped up all the insulation out of the attic. We tore down all the walls inside the residence. We did scanning on floors, hardwood floors, you name it. So it's about day 21, and I'm sitting in the basement, and I'm in my bunny suit. It's the middle of the summer. It's hot, and the humidity is about 200% in the basement. And I'm sitting there in my bunny suit, and I'm actually having my lunch that my wife had packed, and I'm standing there, and I'm looking at the washer and dryer. And I had already searched the washer and the dryer, and there was nothing in it. And we pulled out the lint trays, you name it, nothing. So I'm sitting there, and it was like a lightning bolt hit me. I'm looking at that dryer, and I'm going, that dryer isn't plugged in. So I immediately flipped it over onto the face of the dryer. I ran upstairs. I got some screwdrivers. I took off the back of the dryer because it's just a sheet of metal.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's all the trophies.
Wow.
Sitting right there. And I went, bingo. I knew it had to be here. And the satisfaction of gaining that, because we had photographs of this person with these trophies. And it was so satisfying because that was a big piece of the prosecution's evidence to put forward. So it was fascinating.
Just tied it all together.
Yeah.
Here they are.
Yep. Yeah. So it was one of those very joyous moments for me. But more importantly, I was thinking about the victim and how important this is going to be for that victim to be able to have some type of closure and some type of support in the context of being able to put this person away for a long time. And we did.
So why are you here? Like, why are you not still in IDET? Like, why? What precipitated the change?
So I had been in IDET for, it was 9.5 years, and I remember it was a May weekday, and I was sitting at my desk, and previous to this, for about 3 years, I had gone through a whole series of back-to-back death investigations involving children. And we had a rule in our office at the time that if the phone rang any more than twice without somebody picking it up, my staff sergeant was coming out to give us wrap the knuckles. So the phone rings, and I've got my hand on the phone, and as I'm picking it up, I'm saying, please God, don't let it be another child death investigation. And that was the divining rod, if you will, for me, that I knew psychologically I had to get out of the forensics unit. So went home, had a chat with my wife, and I said, I think I got to go. And she goes, good, because she said, I was going to talk to you. She said, you're starting to change. So she said, you're becoming incredibly callous about death. She said, if I have a family member pass away or something, you'll say something along the lines of, well, thank God it's not me. And I think psychologically that was a way I was dealing with things. And in the back of my mind, I really believed that I was trying to compartmentalize that work was fiction and home life was reality. Because if you let the two blend, then you have some pretty significant issues. So that was a warning bell for me, and another warning bell for me, something I'm not proud of and I never did again. But I did an investigation where there was a 14-month-old baby that had been murdered in her crib, and I had an 11-month-old son.
I was just going to ask you how old your kids were when this was happening, when this change was taking place.
So I went home, and this one, I had never been hit so hard by an investigation in my entire life. And it had a profound impact on me. And as I'm driving home, the only thing I can think about is my own son, Seamus, who was 11 months at the time. And went home and ended up grabbing a bottle of rum and a bottle of Coke, and I sat by his crib and I drank myself to sleep. That was the other divining rod. Never did it again, and have never done it since. But in the same token, I think that I was dealing with it, but dealing with it very inappropriately. And at that time as well, you did not reach out for psychological help because you would be considered weak and you'd be considered banished. And I can tell you now, folks, unequivocally, that has changed. And, even my own two sons, I'm very proud of them. They go at least once a year for a chat with a psychologist on their own, because they want to ensure that they have a baseline that if they do start to change, that they know and they can do something about it. And that's something that we advocate for our own members as well. So that was one of the reasons why, Mark, I said, you know what, it's time for me to get out before I end up with PTSD.
Right. Yeah, well, they say if you look into the abyss and the monsters don't become one.
Exactly.
Whatever that line is, be very careful.
Yep.
As much as you want to be the avenging angel, you don't become the monster.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we really appreciate that. So at this point then, for the people of Belleville, what does the future hold? You once told me that you think chiefs are like bread. They have best before dates and the like.
I do.
So what's the future look like?
I believe every chief has a best before due date. It's like a loaf of bread, and you never want to hit your own. And that's why it's so important to get out. And it's like somebody in sports or any career, you want to leave on the top of your career. You don't want to leave at the bottom. So it's policing has been an incredibly rewarding career for me. I've been very, very blessed. And for me to be able to come home to my hometown and come back here, originally I was a direct entry inspector for a year, which was great to learn all about policing in a mid-sized service, and coming from Ottawa where you had lots of people to do everything, and coming into a facility where you're much more responsible for so many different areas was a real good learning experience for me. And then becoming the deputy, I truthfully never thought I'd have an opportunity to become chief here. Very, very humbled to have that opportunity, and having the opportunity to finish my career as a chief in Belleville. I'm just so fortunate and so blessed.
Well, and even though you stepped away from it, you were able to bring some of that forensics to Belleville as well, because you were telling us about some of the awards that have come from your own forensics department here in Belleville.
They have received a lot of accolades as a result of the work that they've done. They're unbelievable people. We're so fortunate as well that when we were building the new police station, we built our labs to what the 2024 forensic standards are going to be for the provincial legislation. So we're very fortunate that we're not going to have to make any major changes to our forensic labs. And so that whole path of contamination that I was talking about earlier, we've got that locked down. And as we took you through a tour, you can see as well just how methodical that process is to eliminate any potential cross-contamination.
Well, and other stations are looking to you as well, are they not?
They are. We've had lots of different organizations across Ontario come through our station looking at what we've done, the process that we've employed, as well as looking at our specific labs for the victim, for the suspect, and potentially a third person as well.
And the communications in the cars. I mean, when Los Angeles calls and says, hey, Belleville, what's this technology you guys have that you're winning awards
for?
I mean, it's moving itself out onto the streets.
We're so fortunate. This is now... when you start anything with technology, there's an old saying that you're on the bleeding edge.
Yeah.
And we were on the bleeding edge. We're now on the cutting edge. And we were looking at a way of utilizing technology to the greatest benefit of technology and to our officers. And when we were looking at putting laptops in our cars, we really believed that the laptop technology was outdated and at the end of its life cycle. It was on the way out. So every single officer is issued with a phone. So we were looking at leveraging the phone as essentially the CPU or the computer, and being able to have everything that the officer has at the station on a screen that the phone just drops into a holder, and in that holder it's able to display the calls, vehicle checks, person checks, a lot of the data that they would require if they were in the station. So we're constantly bringing on new pieces, and last year at the Ontario Association Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police conference, we received the award for innovation and technology and use of technology. So when you're getting phone calls from LAPD, so the Los Angeles Police Department, Chicago Police Department, and New York City Police Department, on how you're going about doing this, it really sends a pretty strong message. And we've had police agencies from across Canada come and look at what we're doing as well. So really, as the assistant commissioner from the RCMP, Brian Larkin, says, just can't believe what Bell Vegas is doing.
Yeah.
And he's right. We're
true.
very, very fortunate.
Technology is one thing, but to have the whole police service buy into it and use it to its capabilities to demonstrate how effective it is also part of the leadership chain. So congrats on that.
Thanks very much. I wish I could take the credit, but our IT group under the director, Joe Meiderweck, has done an unbelievable job and had a vision and carried out that vision. And, are we still experiencing lumps and bumps? Absolutely. Is it perfect? No, but we're definitely getting there. Been nominated this year for the International Association of Chiefs of Police Award.
That's incredible.
When will you be winning that?
Hopefully in August. Fingers crossed.
Okay.
We have another special episode with Mike planned for later on this summer to talk about a campaign that's going to be going on, probably starting in July throughout the summer, a piece of public information. And we're going to hang on to that, but that's coming up.
With you. I was just thinking, too, we should do like a series with him. Mm-hmm. We should have him back in, because as soon as we turned the mics off, it was like, we should kept taping. He said, there's so many more stories I could share with you, and so many more instances of where a little piece of evidence led to, or if he hadn't been, and he is very detailed oriented, I don't know if you picked that up, and working in forensics, working in policing, you have to be, certainly, but how not giving up on a case, even though you're hitting the wall and you think you've done everything, to go back and then look, like the Peeping Tom in Ottawa. Yeah. Like that story is the piece of evidence that ended up leading to this guy's arrest was like, oh my gosh. Stories like that, it would be great to hear more from him. And it isn't just more stories of the same, it's other angles within his, from large guys of the G20 and Olympics. His events planning. You hear events planning, I immediately think party planning. Yeah. And to a point, I guess it is. But the planning that has to go into a G20 event. Oh, like, with heads of the world are coming to Canada. The Queen's coming to Canada. Right, what goes into that kind of planning? When, dignitaries and notable people come to the country, what do you have to do? We're not talking about a sergeant's retirement party. No, that's not what we're talking about. These are potential targets for some people. How do you put security into place? How the planning, where does that even begin? Remarkable. It is. So, I know, a big podcast today. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Coming up tomorrow, Bill Glisky is going to be on the podcast and on the show. It is Helmet Day tomorrow, or Saturday, rather, at the Belleville Safety Village. So free helmets. How many have they got? Hundreds. Thanks to the Brain Injury Association and Chris Bond. If you thought last year was big, this year's bigger. So going to be on the show. We got your dad joke. We got lots more. Have a great Thursday with the better air conditioning going on. We'll find out what it'll look like tomorrow when you wake up with Mark and Charity Mornings here on 95.5 Hits FM.